how do you pick the right sponsor? So maybe you're a team or a team leader and you need to be looking for a sponsor. How do you think about that? Or you're trying to decide if you should be the sponsor of a project, whether you were asked or you're simply trying to get it started. How do you decide who the right sponsor is? Well, the first thing I'll say is that the usual first automatic heuristic people use is, well, the boss is the sponsor. And as an automatic heuristic, I think this can often fail you. The reason the failure happens is, we'll get into the failure modes, but the failure modes happen much further downstream. They don't happen immediately. And so you don't regret your choice until much later. And unfortunately, that also means the learning about how to pick a sponsor is very difficult because those failure modes and misses happen further on in the process. So take a few moments, take a beat, and think about who the right sponsor is. And so here's some ways to start to think about who that sponsor should be. So one of the important questions to ask is, who can provide useful input and guidance for the work we're about to do? Right? So fundamentally, one of the roles of the sponsor is to help shape the work. And so who's going to be best at that? Who has the best perspective, history, or insight to help shape the work that's about to go on? So for example, you might be planning a significant ERP upgrade, which is not something you go through on a regular basis by design. And you have a new president brought in from another organization, a divisional president perhaps, who just went through this 18 months ago. They may have very fresh and useful perspectives. Now, you're never going to ignore that input anyway, but inserting them right into the project as the sponsor can be very useful. So think about whether it's past perspective or current engagement, who might really have a lot to say, a lot of insight to help shape the work that's about to come. Another question you can ask is, who will really care if we're successful? Or who's the customer of the work? Right? Fundamentally, it's not always about knowing the work itself, but knowing the benefits that the work will provide. That's why we're doing it after all. And so, of course, whoever might be benefiting from the result of the work, they can still be plugged in as a stakeholder, of course, but then the sponsor is really just the arbiter of the internal customer's needs. Why bother? Just put that individual or that leader in the role of sponsor, cut out the middle person, and make sure that the real customer is deeply engaged in the work itself. So, you could have an HR or a financial transformation, and a business unit GM, or all of them, are really, really interested because they're going to be using that work. Right? So you take the financially minded and well-educated, well-perspective GM to help sponsor the financial process that you want to transform. Or the very people-oriented, growth-oriented, build-the-team-oriented business unit GM to be the sponsor of a learning and development project. Right, so think about who's going to benefit, because fundamentally it's not about being the expert in the work itself. That's what the team's for. They're there to be the experts in the work itself, the problem itself, the process itself. But that transformation, that work you need to change, exists for a reason. Who benefits from that? Who's the customer of that? Just go ahead and stick them in as the sponsor and get them directly involved in shaping the work that's about to come. Now, when we talk about levels in the organization, most people assume, hey, I want to go as high as I can in the organization. When an outside entity, a consulting agency or an IT software company comes in, they ask for the CEO as the sponsor. And that's natural. It's to understand, of course, that CEO can remove barriers. And that's part of it, right? Part of the job is to remove barriers. Part of the role is to give permission. However, the higher you go, you're also competing for attention span. Right? There's a lot of other things on that CEO's plate, on that president's plate, on that CFO's plate. And so if that individual that you decide is a very high level sponsor, if they can go a week Without this topic crossing their mind, they are not likely the right sponsor. You want it to cross their mind. You want them to care about it. You want it to be part of their attention span, not just an afterthought. So when you go too high, you're competing for attention span, and then you're not really going to get what you need out of that sponsor. So instead, think about going as low as possible. Now, the further you get to the work, the more familiarity that sponsor is going to have with the work itself, the constraints, maybe not so detailed that they can make the changes, but they understand sort of the dynamics that goes on in that particular work. But the as possible, right? So go as low as possible. The as possible means that they still need decision rights, right? Whether that's implied, whether they have formal decision rights, or through influence and other factors they can get those decision rights, you still want them to be able to decide things. If you go to the sponsor and then they have to go to other people further higher in the organization, they aren't likely going to be very responsive as a sponsor, and you might have gone too low. So go as low as possible. Really think about some of the decisions that need to be made. Where do those decisions rights exist? Where does that influence exist? And where are they close enough to the work where they get it, they can't do it, but they get it, and fundamentally they still care about it enough so that it enters their attention span, that it's not forgotten about and mixed in with a whole lot of other things. So you can ask yourself these questions. There's no formula, there's no right answer, right? So there's good answers for sponsors and there's probably some bad answers for sponsors. There's no perfect answer for who is the sponsor. So ask yourself these questions, whether you think you're the sponsor or you're a team looking for a sponsor, to try to find the right fit for you.